Good evening to our guest and discerning viewers. This is not a live streaming session, so therefore the engagement is indirect. But given our past experience, there have been enough feedback. One of the biggest feedback that has come that I have been speaking more than I should. So I've made a promise to myself that I will speak only when it makes more sense than being silent. We have a very exciting panel today. From a formality point of view, I will introduce them. Well, honestly, they don't need any introduction to our viewers or even otherwise. I'll spend a minute to introduce them to the viewers, at least to those uninitiated. This is the pre-budget season, and there are a lot of writings, talks that we consume. Among all the contents, we thought this is one of the most interesting way to get some a real world experience that some of those who were very strong footprint in not just budget making, even otherwise the overall economic policy making, the policy implementation, writing about it, commenting, asking the right questions, and overall increasing awareness, making society sensitive about what this exercise is all about. If we go to some of the broad headlines, this budget is at a moment of profound global and domestic flux. And the question before policymakers are no longer about arithmetic alone. It's not just numbers, but about judgment, sequencing, prioritizing, and institutional credibility. We have been seeing that the global economy remains fragmented. Capital is cautious. During our discussion, the learned speakers, depending on the context, they might like to dwell upon. Everybody today knows there's something called geopolitics that intrudes into the market. And yet India carries the weight of elevated expectations of growth, jobs, stability, and reform. The budget is not just a fiscal document. It's a strategic signal about how the state interprets risk, allocates scarce resources, and defines its partnership with the markets, states, and citizens. One can criticize whether we need the Big Bang exercise that we have been doing for years, but what budget really means to everyone, how it touches everyone in the society, that is something we all are concerned about, and that is where the interest comes from. So therefore, it must balance ambition with prudence, reform with continuity, and short-term pressures with long-term intent. I think we could not have a better panel than the one that we have. It's one of the most erudite panel I've ever been part of a direct conversation. So that we have macroeconomists, they'll bring the trade angles to it. There are policy advisors, there are senior most bureaucrat in the finance ministry. So it's a well mix to examine not just what the budget might announce. I'm sure these are the people who will not just touch upon, those are very routine, very obvious elements that is embedded in budget. Rather, how the budget people or who are part of budget making should think about resilience, credibility, and India's economic trajectory in an increasingly uncertain world, the VUCA world, what they call. So with this, let me invite our distinguished panelists to share the perspective on the choices that matter most. To start with, we have Dr. Surjit Bhalla, the well-known economist. Currently, he's the chairman of the technical expert group. The mandate for the committee is to do a full-scale household income survey. I hope by 2026, the committee will come up with his findings. Before, he has been part of the Prime Minister Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, has been a member, and then he took up the IMF assignment as the Executive Director for India. Then we have Mr. Ashok Bhattacharya. So he's one of the most experienced editor that we all know. He's the editorial director for the prestigious Business Standard. He's known for his incisive writing, comments, and one of the most respected business journalists. And I generally, whenever I see his post, I see him more as an economist. I think he has a very special fascination for this subject. I'm sure as we go out of or end this program, our enrichment level will be much higher after listening to them. Then I come to Dr. Arvind Maram. He has served as the finance secretary for the government of India. During his stint as the finance secretary, he has prepared 3 union budgets. He has relocated himself to Jaipur, where he is associated with think tank. He advises government and teaches, which very few people get that opportunity to follow that passion. He's teaching people how to not just learn policies, how to make policies. So that's very important. It is very thematically at a macro level. The learned speakers can frame their thoughts the way they wish. And then once they share their expectation from this budget, with that, I hand over the mic to the panel.
So Dr. Surjit Bhalla would like to start the discussion.
We are good to go. Dr. Bala,
Yeah.
you can start, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'll start with your opening comments, which I think is very relevant, that the budget is not a fiscal document. So I think that is the most important consideration. It used to be, but those days are gone. And it is much more about policy and policy across the board. Um, Now, what are the problems that I think this budget can help solve, not solve, but help elucidate and give us a direction? So, what ails the Indian economy? And I think it's fairly universal view, correct me if I'm wrong, that what ails the Indian economy is a lack of investment. And by that, one means private investment. There's no dearth of public investment. And public investment, as we know, is very, very important for growth. And we've done a lot of public investment over the last 10, 15 years. So what we need is investment, private investment, and that's a real problem. We don't have, and one of the elements in there of private investment is what's happening to FDI. So FDI in India today is back to the levels last observed in 1990, which is 0.7% of GDP. Now, we had been operating with 2.5% of GDP. This is 0.7%. So what can the budget do about it? And maybe later, but I think one of the real policies that we need to follow, and more aggressively than has been done, is our real interest rates, policy rates are very high. And take the prime rate, we all compare ourselves to the leading growth economy in the world, at least for the last 30 years, which is China. Now, the real policy rate in China is somewhere around 2.5, 3%. The real policy, or 2.5 is the nominal, sorry. And if the inflation is 1, it's somewhere around 2%. The real policy rate in India is somewhere around 3.5, 4%, one of the highest it's ever been. And we had the smallest or the lowest GDP growth rate ever in 2019-20, which was around, I think, 3.8%. So I hope that in this regard, I want to mention last thing, and then we can, the recent pronouncement by the Supreme Court. If there wasn't enough damage done to our private investment, a Supreme Court has come up with charging Tiger Global for an investment they made much before the rules changed. And I think, we have learned people over here as to why do these things happen in India. Just when we absolutely need investment, we are crying. Foreign investment is one of the lowest ever. And here we come up with the Supreme Court overruling the High Court and coming out with a judgment, which to my mind, no one has explained as to how that is either needed or even sensible. So the budget can say something on this, and it can say that, look, we are considering looking at this issue, something, unless if we don't do that, and we don't get FDI up, the Viksit Bharat is a pipe dream. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for your opening remark, and it's a very interesting reference. The most important point that you made is the subdued private investment. How do we revive it? So we go to our next speaker.
Thank you. First of all, I must say it's a privilege to be here on the panel with such distinguished speakers as Dr. Bhalla and Mr. Bhattacharya. This also, I'm very happy to see that Dr. Bhalla has set the tone for the discussion for this afternoon, where we are not looking at what should be the fiscal deficit and what should be the CAD, etc., the nuts and bolts of but looking at more how budget can be used as a strategic instrument for bringing in the next generation of policy impulses for the economy to make it grow. And as Dr. Bhalla said, investment is one big weakness. In my opinion, we are discussing the union budget at a moment when India's macroeconomic challenges are no longer episodic or cyclical, but they are deeply structural. And the difficulty has increased because there are global volatility, tariff shocks, technological disruption driven by artificial intelligence, climate stress, weak human capital outcomes, a fraying fiscal federal architecture, the absence of credible social safety nets for a largely informal workforce, and a chronically underperforming innovation ecosystem. And all these are converging, which have brought us to this point where the government has to begin to look at the budget as as an instrument in their hands for being able to create a glide path for the next 10 years as to how the Indian economy will grow and in which direction it will go. Together, these elements which I have just mentioned expose weaknesses that have accumulated over time in the way the Indian state raises revenues, prices public goods, allocates expenditure, manages risks, and builds productive capacity. So all these weaknesses which have accumulated are now coming to fore, and we are seeing the problem in also slowing GDP. This year, the IMF says it's going to come down to 6.4%, and also the flat private investment that Dr. Bhalla also alluded to. Now, therefore, a central question is not whether the budget is expansionary or conservative in a narrow accounting sense. It is whether it begins a transition to a new macroeconomic and public finance paradigm, one that strengthens state capacity rather than merely managing fiscal arithmetic. And therefore, I would like to suggest, and we can discuss if you consider it important. We can discuss all of them or some of them, but I would like to suggest that Budget 2026 should be consciously structured around 8 interlinked pillars. The first is macroeconomic resilience in an age of permanent global volatility, recognizing that trade shocks, capital flow instability, climate events, and geopolitical disruptions are now the norm rather than the exception. The second is calibrated economic autonomy, aimed at reducing excessive dependence on the US and Chinese economies across currency, technology, and markets, without retreating into autarky. The third is competitiveness as a governance outcome, addressing distorted pricing of power, land, fuel, logistics, and compliance, and recognizing that export performance ultimately reflects state capacity rather than only tariffs and incentives. This is one of the issues that when Dr. Bhalla was speaking about why FDI doesn't come, taxation is one part of it, But in my opinion, there are much more structural, deeply embedded structural issues which are now impacting our private investment. And on competitiveness as governance outcome, we could have much greater discussion if you wish. I can bring some evidence before you to show why there is a deeper problem than just taxation in this case. Fourth pillar, in my opinion, is quality of public expenditure and human capital formation, shifting decisively from spending volumes to spending effectiveness, particularly in education and health as core growth fundamentals. Fifth is social safety nets for a predominantly informal economy. Even now, almost 94% of Indians, give and take whatever estimates we do, are in the informal sector. And this is a very vulnerable sector, as we have seen during the pandemic and the mass migration of the migrant labor, which brought starkly to fore this whole issue of the informal sector and its vulnerability. So, social safety nets for a predominantly informal economy, treating employment guarantees, migrant worker protections, and income security for landless labor and small farmers as macroeconomic stabilizers, not welfare residuals. Pillar 6 would be fiscal federalism as a cornerstone of macro stability and growth, restoring predictability, trust, and analytical neutrality in center state transfers, and addressing the institutional vacuum left after the abolition of the Planning Commission. Seventh is R&D, innovation, and competition, rebuilding India's fragmented innovation ecosystem through simplified public funding, credible and independent competition regulation, and government-private partnerships for frontier technologies, including AI for public services, with shared intellectual property and controlled diffusion. And finally, circular finance and green development as the organizing principle, using capital recycling, asset monetization, and blended finance to bridge fiscal stability with the scale of investment required for climate transition and sustainable growth. So, framed this way, Budget 2026 becomes more than a fiscal statement. It becomes a test of whether the Indian state is prepared to realign its institutions, incentives, and capacities to meet the demands of a far more uncertain and demanding decade ahead. This, I believe, should be the foundation for the making of the budget.
Great, sir. I think the eight commandments that you have given your co-panelists, while they were acknowledging each of them, everybody would find a lot of merit in what that. A very quick comment, the center-state relation, that's a very important, and leaving the political complexity aside, as a country, somehow we have been little confused the way we see the role of states when it comes to reforms. The general impression is that for every reforms become the singular responsibility of the central government, whereas bulk of it are moved by the states. So the point I'm trying to internalize, I think we need to have a very different ways of working the relationship between the center and state, and that is where the most of the solution to the reform lies practically, because these are the states which will move the reforms. But otherwise, very interesting point, sir. So now we go to Mr. Bhattacharya, sir, for his opening remark.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege to be part of this exclusive club, so to say. I will be brief in my opening comments. What I would do is this, that I'll try to just, from my perspective, what I do see are the key challenges for the budget makers this year, and what should the government consider to address those challenges. So I look at these challenges in six broad buckets. The first bucket is the external challenge bucket, which is, we know what all is happening in the world. It is just not just about Mr. Trump or Greenland or the Indo-US trade deal. But the overall, the global scenario is changing. India's exports sector is deeply impacted. We are not really talking about it right now. We're not really looking at what's really happening in Tirupur or what is happening to the shrimp centers in southern India. But I'm 100% sure if we don't find a quick solution to this problem or some sort of ameliorative package for these sectors which have been deeply hurt by what's really happening in the global trade scenario. So I think one is the external challenge, which is substantial, huge. The second big challenge, in my view, is jobs, not necessarily in the way Dr. Mayram talked about. Of course, that's an important issue. But related to that, I would say is this that the kind of job that we are seeing is something that most Indians don't treat them as jobs. I mean, if I go out in the street and you look at the rising, prospering gig economy, you see that a lot of people are doing jobs, but that's the kind of a job that nobody takes pride in that kind of a job. So job is a larger challenge. It's not a question of 90% of being in informal sector only. That's an important issue. But equally is the quality of job that we create in the economy. So that's number two challenge in my view. That's the macro challenge. The third is, as we all have seen in the first advanced estimates, the demand side of the economy is pretty tepid in a sense that growth of around 7% is probably something that nobody should feel good about, and it's a nominal level. So I think that's the third big challenge on the demand side of the economy. And the fourth is, as Dr. Bhalla pointed out, is about private corporate investment. Now, the private corporate investment are not investing for the simple reason that they don't see their capacity utilization level has gone up beyond 75%. They don't see demand coming up. So why would they invest? Instead, they will go in for investing abroad. Along with that is, have we made, and this is connected with the external challenges trade issue, is that trade and investment are deeply interlinked. That have we made sure that even when we liberalize trade, even if you bring down tariffs, have we made investments in the country a little more attractive? The ease of doing business is really the ease of doing business, or have we created more procedural challenges? Is deregulation has not spread as far as possible? So corporate investment is a big thing. And the final sixth, there's a sixth challenge, is the rural sector. The rural economy is not at all in the pink of its health. If you look at the urban demand and the rural demand, and look at the way the GST cuts and the income tax have actually translated themselves into creation of demand, it is concentrated in the top 10% of the economy. So the real economy, which is what's supposed to create demand, is not really doing its job because it is not really within the pale. So therefore, we need to think of measures by which how do we revive that rural economy and including agriculture. I mean, 90% of your total workforce is unorganized, and out of that, 48% is in agriculture. And it is actually rising. So the entire thing, to my mind, one budget cannot address these issues. But if there are signals to addressing those concerns, I think we would have moved a long way. So what do you think the budget should do? As both the panelists have talked about, fiscal prudence, whether through the deficit reduction plan or through the new debt anchor, which to my mind is a decent idea. But to move away from fiscal deficit and just focus on debt anchor probably is not a good idea at a time when you have states which are not moving to the debt anchor. So, for the market, it's better to stay on with the fiscal deficit and give the debt anchor also. So I hope the budget addresses this concern of the market. The market is deeply worried that, I need to know because it is the states also who play a role in the market. So that's one. And the second point is, of course, I am not one of those who believe that enough of capex by let there be demand stimulus. I think the capex plan has worked. There are early signs of an absorptive capacity issue in the government sector. As a matter of fact, sectors like the railways have not been able to actually absorb that money that has been given to them every year. So there is that absorptive capacity issue, and rightly, probably in the last 3 years, we have seen that the share of states in terms of interest-free 50 years loan has gone up. It used to be around 1 or 2%, and this year it is 13%. So my sense is that it's a good idea to move to that, because the central capacity to absorb that capex is not good. So increase the state's share in it, and since it is linked to reforms, I do understand the concerns of the center-state federal relationship, where the states might complain. But I think capex, given the center's absorptive capacity issue, is a good idea to link more and more to state loans. The third thing I would say is this, that the country is in dire need of a strong, vibrant MSME package. This is the sector which carries a big load for the economy, whether it is in exports, whether it is in manufacturing. And this is the sector which got hit not just by one shock of monetization, demonetization, the second shock of GST, and the third shock of COVID. So we need to really come out with a proper package to see in what way can be done for the MSMEs to tackle both even the jobs situation and also the demand situation. The fourth thing I think the budget should do is, at last, it should bring the asset sale and privatization agenda, which has been long forgotten, from 2021, after the famous announcement of this 2021 policy on non-strategic PSUs will be sold, complete hibernation there. So I think it's time that, given the fact that the domestic investors are still very much in the market, even though the foreign investors are going away, you should take full advantage of this and bring back graded, if not in one way, privatization policy which needs to be implemented. And a statement of policy would do a lot of, provide a lot of assurances. I'll just touch three other issues quickly. One is, I think this country needs a major revamp of the expenditure program of the center. Right now, they are very inefficient. They also undermine the center-state relationships, which it ought to be. The manner in which whether it was done through Narega change, and I think that there are attempts at changing these centrally sponsored schemes and central sector schemes in such a manner that state share probably would go up even further. So I think we need to really look at closely what should be done on the expenditure revamp program. And two points. Probably this is the right time, given the rural sector stress and the demand and the jobs, get the farm sector laws which were abandoned in 2020 under pressure, bring it back. If the government could bring back the labor codes, there is no reason that they should not bring back the farm sector laws. And finally, given the fact that your monthly net foreign investment in this country for the last several months has been a paltry $1 billion. Don't look at the gross foreign direct investment, look at the net investment, that is taking into account the existing foreign companies repatriating and disinvesting, and Indian companies investing abroad. Now, it tells a sad story, and I think the budget should provide clear guidelines on what it needs to do to get the foreign investors back into the country. $67 billion of data center investment is good and bad both, because they do tax our water economy and the energy economy. We should welcome them, but at the same time, we should welcome foreign investment in a large number of other areas. And therefore, what kind of ease of doing business measure that we need to do is something that we need to worry about. I think I've taken more than my due share of time. Thank you very much. I'm happy to discuss any of the points that I've
No,
shared with
absolutely
you.
not, sir. I think apart from the capital flight, which is a very, maybe a common man like me may not relate to, But otherwise, you have raised multiple emotive issues, whether it is rural distress, the agriculture that employs a lot of workforce, but at the same time, there's a dichotomy. The GDP participation from that sector has been abysmally low, and this is not for the first time. As somebody said, that not through one budget we're trying to resolve all this, or that is possible. No, but at least we should seriously talk about it because we take pride in our demography, our population, and that's a sector that has given us not just food security, that has given us employment, that has kept the rural India alive. So that's a sector which can never be pushed to margin. So we should do everything that can help improve that sector. And there's a lot of, I won't say overlap. I think you pretty much echo Mr. Dr. Maram on the quality of spend when he made a catchy term saying that let's not focus on volume but on the quality, on the effectiveness. I think same thing you told in your own way. So there's a lot of agreement on those points. So with this, man, thank you so much, sir. It has been a great start. So I come back to Dr. Bhalla. Sir, last time I remember when around this time we assembled, there was a tax cut last time on the personal tax side, and there was the dissenting view on that. But you were someone who is very vocal about, you were in favor of such tax ups. Not taking a cue from that, do you see, so this budget should have some bold tax reforms, or you believe that the stability, the certainty should get more weightage than all the big announcements? Because you made a reference to the case that has consumed almost everybody, mostly the consulting world. They are very much worried that how market is going to read this document. The jury is still out. Yes, sir.
I really don't think there's much more that the government can or should do on the taxation front. I think significant reforms have taken place both on personal income tax as well as on the GST, on excise taxes. But the elephant in the room, and which we have skirted, is what I do think will bring about a lot of the changes that Arvind proposed, and including Ashok, as far as the farm laws, is a trade deal with the US. Now, a trade deal with the US is a lot more important than a trade deal with EU. And for the following reason, that I think of the counterfactual that we have a trade deal with the US. Will something like Tiger Global ever happen? No. Will there be increased foreign direct investment in India? Yes. Will the rate of return to investment in India go up? Yes. And therefore, the domestic corporates will invest more in India than outside? Yes. So, it's staring us in the face, has been staring us in the face for the last year. That look, and then we have taken comfort in the fact that we are a big market. So therefore, the foreign investors will come to India. Now, as I pointed out in an article, the size of our GDP is equal to that of California. And mind you, if you take out the fact that the informal sector, the poor, and so on and so forth, it's minuscule. So, whereas California, the size of is 4 trillion. We are much lower than 4 trillion. And, so what a trade deal does, and I'm very pleased that you brought up this farm laws. I don't understand how this government was so committed to farm laws. They brought these in, and now everything is preceded by that the farm sector is immune to any discussion that we won't have. I mean, and then the other element that has crept into our policy discussion is self-reliance. Which country ever became developed by being self-reliant? So I'm very confused. I mean, they are very straightforward solutions, which are, that doesn't mean we won't have any problems, but you get a trade deal, which basically means you are much more open economy than you were. And an openness brings in a dynamism that is not present in bureaucratic decisions. So, ease of doing business, let's take that. If you have the pressure from the exporters for not having inputs or whatever, that creates its own lobbying. So that's what I was discussing earlier informally. We are relying too much on bureaucrats to decide our fate. And which is why we are in these problems. That to think that, rather than have market forces, you will have bureaucrats deciding who does what, like the quality control orders that we had, which thankfully has been removed. Take, for example, ease of doing business. I mean, and the deregulation that the Niti Aayog has talked about, highly in need. But, why is it that we have? I think we need to, part of civil society, need to ask these hard questions. That why are we so different than everywhere else in the world? And one point in our thinking, and and both my esteemed co-panelists have brought up about the informal sector and how jobs are a problem. Well, I've got news for you guys as well as the rest. The informal employment in Vietnam is 71%. You find anybody there talking about informal employment? Informal employment is a big item. It's part of definition around the world. Second, related to this jobs, just look at the data about the jobs for in any country in the world. Real wages have not gone up for the last 10 years in most countries of the world, developed and developing. The world has changed, and we are still stuck in our old beliefs. So therefore, it's much easier if you have policies that encourage private entrepreneurship, that encourage private investment, rather than having regulatory cholesterol stacking up arteries. I mean, so I think I will conclude by saying the problems, every problem that has been brought up here and in every other discussion has been known for 40 years, 50 years. We have all said the same. We keep saying the same thing every year, and nothing happens. And we continue down the same road. So I'll conclude, farm laws. I do not understand why the government is not considering bringing farm laws. That will energize. That was what it was meant to be. Once they had reached that decision, which was a controversial decision, but they had reached it, now to withdraw completely, saying that, the farm sector is a no-go sector in trade talks. So I don't know. We know what the solutions are. There are enough economists in the world, enough policymakers in the world, enough thinkers in the world. Every country has faced these problems. We think we are unique. We are the only ones facing these problems. That's our problem. I'll end there. Our problem is we think we are unique, that only we face these problems, and only we, including our bureaucrats, have the ability to solve it, which is why they don't get solved.
Well, I think you have made very powerful points. The only thing which I realize in India is that we are very afraid of pointing a finger towards politicians. So the same bureaucrats work in 1991 with Dr. Manmohan Singh when the economy opened up. The same bureaucrats worked when the economy was doing 8 to 9% per annum. They were the same people. The question is, the bureaucracy is like a thoroughbred horse. It's the rider who has to ride the horse and go at whatever speed it wishes to in whatever direction it wishes to. The horse will take you there. So I think if you are saying all this, you need to start pointing fingers at those who talk about Swadeshi, who talk about Make in India,
Self
self-reliance. They're politicians who do this. And we need to have the courage to be able to say that. Bureaucrats are a simple, easy target. But we are afraid of saying that. We were not ever before afraid, but now we're afraid of pointing out. And I think that's one thing which I would like to say, whereas I agree with everything you're saying. But I'm saying that you're looking at the wrong person and claiming that person is the doctor when they are simply the compounders assisting the doctors. It's the doctor's skill which makes the difference. But let me say this. We have been talking about private investment and like to share some numbers with you. And this again, I would say, requires political will as much as we had the GST Council of the ministers, which brought about GST and has been reforming and doing whatever. It's a political structure, not bureaucratic structure. We need to look at this. For instance, tariffs in power sector. Now we are looking at, you will have an agreement with the US on tariffs, etc., whatever, free trade, and investment will come. No, I don't think it will come. For the never be able to create a level playing field for Indian manufacturer to become internationally competitive. Look at land. Land is another cost factor. Industrial land in India is both expensive and unpredictable, often tied up in speculation and delays. In Vietnam and other countries, they have leapfrogged on it. They have got ready-made industrial areas where they provide the industry with full infrastructure. But we have not been able to do this, and also the social infrastructure is not there for the industrialist. If I was industry secretary in Rajasthan when we were trying to set up the Neemrana Japanese industrial area. And I used to have a lot of discussions with the Japanese. And the first question they asked us was, will there be a Japanese restaurant there? So it's not a question of just having industrial land, but what is the quality of life that we are able to do? If you look at transport and logistics, it's a similar story. India's freight costs are inflated because 45 to 55% of petrol and diesel prices are taxes, including central excise and state levies. Now, this is within the central government's remit. But our transportation costs, so in Vietnam, the figure in terms of the cost of production, it is 10 to 12%. In Malaysia, 8 to 10%. And in India, it is 18 to 20%. So this cost, where does it go? I mean, you can have any kind of agreements with anyone, but you are not competitive internationally, globally competitive in production, because these are the hidden costs that come into your production costs because our own structural imbalances that we have created. The same problem we will see is in terms of, other activities, if you look at them. For instance, the taxation, the compliance burden which we have. Now, taxation, you have said, have been reformed in terms of the tax rates and so on, but the compliance has not got reformed too much. And the regulatory overburden is very high, which needs to come down. You had mentioned, Mr. Bhattacharya had mentioned about MSMEs. In Rajasthan, when I was advising the Rajasthan government in 2019, I had suggested to them and they incorporated a law, and I would seriously recommend that please have a look at it. It's called Rajasthan MSME Facilitation and Development Act of 2019, a 4-page act, which says, notwithstanding anything in any state law, MSMEs will not require any prior approval or NOC or anything from any government department under any state law. And we exempted them from all of it for 5 years. And we had recommended that point of time, the Chief Minister had also written to the Prime Minister that similar dispensation under central laws should be done for MSMEs, but it was not done. So I'm saying to you, it's it has to have political will. It cannot happen at the level of bureaucracy at all. A law has to be enacted, it has to be a political will of it. We have the same issue in terms of the raw materials. Now, in food processing industry, for instance, we don't have a robust forward market or commodities exchange. So you cannot have long-term contracts with Indian farmers at all. You're talking about farm laws. My first question is, can the government of India have a long-term policy on export of food items? You have onion export long-term contract and suddenly the government will put a ban on it because the prices are going up. Or the potatoes they will freeze the export of potatoes or tomatoes or whatever. So the question here is, this is all has to do with political economy, and the political leadership has to be educated on this, that you can't have a stop-go kind of a thing in a export market or in a industrial, if you want to become globally competitive. So my sense is that we have to look at these structural issues which are embedded in terms of cost of doing business. It's not just the ease of doing business, but the cost of doing business, where the complexity of doing business also adds to the cost. But all these things, unless we improve upon it, you are not going to get FDI, and your private investment will not rise unless it is crony capitalist who can, of course, benefit from the most complex systems actually benefit a set of industrialists the most. And that will continue, or that can happen. This happened in the past with every government. It's happening with this government. So there is no difference on that. But the fact is that this can only go if we are able to look at the structural reforms. And my serious recommendation is they should have a interstate structural reforms council, as they had in the case of GST, and look at some of these issues and go for it and say that we are going to reform it.
Thank you.
I will just add a few points to what Dr. Bhala and Dr. Mayaram said. One is the point was raised about foreign investment and Tiger Global-like situation. I mean, Tiger Global is a classic case of Supreme Court reading a piece of legislation with a retrospective impact. It is not as bad as a government framing a retrospective law itself. So I think Vodafone law was a retrospective law. This is the Supreme Court reading the law.
Who went to the Supreme Court against the High Court judgment?
No, that's all right. But the Supreme Court read it differently. And the Supreme Court read it.
Somebody went in appeal against the High Court judgment.
That's right. That's right.
Government.
But there's a difference between the two. There is a difference between the two, that here the government has not framed the law. Government had framed the law in 2016, saying that any investment that was made before April 2017 will be grandfathered. Now, the government was very clear. I think what has happened is Supreme Court is reinterpreting the tax residency certificate and saying that if there is no direct capital gains, if there is an indirect capital gains, then I will not allow this. Now, Supreme Court, in my view, has crossed its brief. And I think the government will have to come in and issue a kind of a clarification, hopefully in this budget, because this is going to really cause a lot of problem for a variety of many foreign investment. I don't have the exact figure, but somebody gave me that figure. There's a huge amount of foreign investment which is at stake. So I think that's one element. The second element is something that Dr. Mayaram also referred to, is this, that we need a budgetary exercise, probably wherein we should not underestimate the importance and relevance of 30 states in this country whose total budget size is at least 15% more than the central government's budget size. So they are a huge element. Now, when it comes to policy making, governance, deficit, I mean, it is the states that matter. So we need a structure in which the states can be taken on board and said that, listen, this is what we'll do, this is how we'll do, like it has happened in the case of the Deregulation Commission by Rajiv Gauba, like it has happened in the case of the TV Somanathan committee, which is looking at various procedural changes in consultation with the chief secretaries of the states. So I think we need greater coordination with the states. And I can see that it is getting reflected in some ways. Look at the draft Electricity Act, Amendment Act, in which they are talking in terms of an electricity council, which will have representation from the states as well as from the center, and deciding, because electricity is, after all, is in the concurrent list. So you need instruments of policy making wherein the 30 states and the center sit down, and in a spirit that of late the GST Council spirit has been very cooperative, not in the previous few years, but of late I do see GST Council is taking decisions in a far more cooperative way. And I think we need to have a center state compact on going forward if we want to see the gains of the inherent gains of the potential of the economy to be realized. I'll stop there. And
Great point, sir. If there's one demand that you have from the finance minister, so what will be that reform?
I'll say one, I will say two, which I mentioned. I will say bring privatization back on the agenda and get the farm sector laws back into it. These are the two things that I would say.
Great, sir. I think
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you joined us. We will also.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, Dr. Balda depends on it.
Yeah. But sir, it is more of a repeat. You already made a passing reference to it, and Dr. Mairam also alluded to that point. The budget making is a trade-off between the growth and the fiscal prudence. And it's not a very easy choice. Do you see there is an opportunity for the reconciliation? I know it's a more of an academic point. How do the prudence and growth interact?
No, so the balance between growth and what? You said
The fiscal consolidation.
fiscal consolidation.
Yes, sir.
No. Okay. Look, back in 1998, Montague, who was then finance secretary or whatever, asked me and Jim Hansen, who was then the bank's representative in India, to have a discussion, debate on the fiscal deficit and the importance of fiscal deficit. Now, fiscal consolidation, all the rest of it. The whole question that you asked in the trade-off, should we worry? So my position at that time, which is close to 30 years ago, was that the whole story on fiscal deficit, etc., is vastly overemphasized, overstated. And I don't know of a single country that, other than once you get into a real problem like hyperinflation, where fiscal deficit is a matter of much policy discussion, and certainly not for a developing economy like India. We have much, as this discussion has shown, problems facing us for which we need solutions than to worry about whether the fiscal deficit should be 4.4% of GDP or 4.8% of GDP. So due apologies to all those who worked on this fiscal document. I think it's, there are, as I said, the world has changed, and we are still in a world where we thought the fiscal deficit was important. Obviously, we have enough consideration that, look, we're not going to, and there hasn't been a single point in Indian history where Indian policymakers have allowed to get the economy or the fiscal or inflation out of hand. Okay. So I trust, this is where I trust the bureaucracy and the policymakers to do it, and the politicians to do it. But to me, it is a absolutely, I don't even discuss it in any of my columns or otherwise, the fiscal deficit. So there's no, I guess if there's one central point that I have been wanting to make, and I have made for the last decade or so, that the world has changed and we have changed. So please acknowledge what is happening in the world, and what is happening here is the same, whether it is fertility rates dropping, inflation. I think the major problem for the world, including India, over the next 5 years or so, is lack of inflation. So you'll have the same fiscal deficit, 5% of GDP, 6% of GDP, etc. And so that's not a problem. So let's recognize that there are global changes that have happened, that openness is the most important contributor to growth, and that I'll end with the little discussion earlier. Let us blame both the politicians and the guardians of bureaucracy. So both are at fault. It's not one or the other, because they work in tandem. They have to work in tandem. And, maybe, so anyway, so I think we have to recognize that we are not alone in the world, and that the very few solutions that have been known for the last 200 years in world's economy is that the first thing you've got to do is be more open. So that we haven't, whether it is in investment, whether it is all our controls, all our regulations, not having farm laws. I mean, we are, tell me where we are not a dictated to economy. We should let the people be, which is let people act on their own. I'll end with one example. Okay, we need skilling. So somebody has identified we need skilling. Okay. Now, why is it that nowhere else in the world, I haven't seen any documents about, we need skilling? The market allocates resources, allocates people according to the skilling needs of the firms as well as the education of the individuals. So we can argue, and we should argue, about increasing the quality of our education. But that argument can be made anywhere else in the world. So, I don't know. So the only thing we know for sure is that if you allow competition, international and domestic, productivity will go up. That's what you want, is individual productivity, national productivity will go up. There is not a single example of where you become open and your productivity goes down. Open in terms of regulations, open in terms of employment, open in terms of discrimination, etc. So I don't know. Maybe I belong to a camp that thinks we know the policies. What we are afraid of is putting the policies in place.
Thank you. Thank you for such a very comprehensive response. Sir, we are coming to the fag end of the conversation. So just out of your 8 canons, if I pick up one, and I'm sure you'll be very brief also, that is the center-state relation. Okay, and you are best placed to you sort of deal with that, because you served both in the state as well as in the center. You understand the rule of the game, and there's more of politics than anything else. Obviously, that is not the mandate for the day, and we are not venturing into that. Uh, but as we see, and somebody made a point that Manrega thing, so that has been a revamp in the expenditure thing, so how the state share has been increased. Not to narrow down to any particular event, if you want to say, so how we don't live in an ideal world, so there is no ideal utopian solution to anything. Recognizing that reality, what are the possible avenues to improve that center state? Because like GST Council, I'm sorry to shift the gear, I'm going here and there. So Mr. Bhattacharya said that so there's a proposal for Electricity Council, and we've seen GST Council, which is a quintessential model for a cooperative federalism that we all read in the book at least. So that every decision is by consensus, there's no voting, so everybody comes on board. So such a wonderful thing to experience, but let's not, I mean, it will be naive to expect that everything, everywhere else that gets replicated. Just to hear your thoughts, how center-state relation can be more workable, more better, yeah, for the welfare.
It's very clear that there is no institutional or legal manner in which we can create a fiscal federalism. And then, because it also depends on how those who operate this function. So, politics in this has always been there, but we are seeing it increasing over the years. The political aspect of central state relationships has increased exponentially. If you look at the transfers in central schemes or centrally sponsored schemes, you will see a very preponderantly heavier transfers to certain states for political reasons than to others. Many other states have been starved. For instance, MG Narega funds have the West Bengal. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but West Bengal has been crying hoarse that they're almost 5,000 crores of their MG Narega, which they should have got, have not been given to them. So this breakdown of a kind of a consensus on the idea of competition with collaboration, which is what the Constitution created. That breakdown is the one which is creating most of the problems in the fiscal cooperation, federalism or cooperation between state and center, etc. That's what's coming inside. And it is increasing. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. This GST Council consensus also is a fiction. Earlier, it was not consensus. So if you remember, originally, when the discussion was on for having GST from 2007, 8, 6, 7, 8, two states held out, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, and they said they will not have GST. Whereas all the states wanted, but the GST could not be brought in because two states said we don't want it. When we are talking of this consensus means that three states may have major problems and say we don't want it, but you say that, look, you are only three states. The consensus, the sense of the house is we go along and we go along. And a lot of state governments I've seen have complained of this, that they are steamrolled in GST councils. Nobody hears them, and then these decisions take place. So I'm saying that this breakdown of trust, this rebuilding this trust is going to be the most critical part in whatever we want to do, whether it's Electricity Council or anything else. Because for Electricity Council, also if you make or Electricity Act, every state has to elect electricity's power is not in the sense the states also have to come on board. It cannot be done by the central government alone. And therefore, you have a problem. I agree with Professor Bhalla that the farm laws are very critical and important. They should have come in. But why was this great resistance to that? Because for 1.5, 2 years, people were sitting on the street, maybe perhaps not even knowing what is in the act or laws. Maybe they just didn't understand it. But they were opposing it because they were not taken on board. When you bring in a law and 3 days in the parliament without a discussion, you ram it through the parliament, you run into this problem, even if it is the best law in the world for the country. I'm not saying that anybody's intention is bad, but it's just the manner of doing this. Most of the laws nowadays, we don't even have a discussion in the parliament. When you have that, there's no national consensus. So the first chance that happens, the law breaks down. See, the problem is if you look at Aristotle's classification of states, there the two classification, the ideal and the perverted. So in ideal state, democracy is the third, which is the worst kind of governance. But in the perverted, which is what the real world is, democracy is first. But it is messy, it is slow, it is noisy, it takes time to build consensus. But without doing that, you don't have a national framework. People are not brought on board. And today, I think we have less and less patience with doing that. I'm not talking about any government, any party, but it is just the national pastime that we have become less patient with bringing people, for persuading people, for accepting dissent, persuading those who dissent with you. All that is now lost, which we used to see across the board. I mean, I was in government for 40 years and I have worked through different sets of governments. And I used to see in the past, even in the state, there used to be a lot of give and take between different parties, different points of view, civil society. It was messy, it was confusing and messy. And that's why I have always had great respect for politicians, because they are the ones who can make some sense out of this mess. Bureaucrats can't make any sense out of this mess, but they can. But that was the necessity, and that is why politicians are necessary. Because in this messy world of India, which is most messy, they can actually come together and create a framework out of nothing. But that capacity is shrinking. And I think that is where India is losing out. We are losing out on that because we are losing out on building consensus, building fences, talking across the fences, being able to discuss sensibly, even if we have different points of view. Today we have become so abusive. Suddenly, if I don't agree with Dr. Balla, I start abusing him. I mean, that's not the way. This is not never have been the way to create a consensus. That's my view on federalism. We need to build back that trust between the states and the center, where there is a trust that you are working together on something which is larger good.
Great, sir. We have our own views, and fair enough. We conclude now, unlike what we did with Mr. Bhattacharya when we let him go. If both of you can just share one reform that you would expect from this coming budget, and then we'll make the concluding remark and we end this session. Dr. Bala.
Something about what should be in the finance minister's speech, for sure, is what are we going to do on this Tiger Global nonsense. So, and I think she can do that, and she should. And the second is, I do agree with the contention that we need farm laws.
Yeah, and Dr. Madam.
I think the most important part here at this point, and we are at the inflection point here, is in terms of where the country goes in innovation and technology. And we are seeing that we are losing that race very rapidly. So I would think that putting together a robust ecosystem, which includes education, quality education from the primary level onwards, is very much part of that innovation ecosystem, because without that, we will not have the kind of manpower we require. So R&D, innovation and competition. And I think we need a much more robust competition commission and competition law. I think we have completely broken down competition system at the moment. There's too much of monopoly, and that also is stifling India's growth to a very great extent.
Wonderful.
So we need a more autonomous, independent competition. So I think I would put that all in R&D, innovation and competition. These three things should be on top priority, for which are directional in nature.
It would not happen next year, nothing will come out of it. But if you move in that direction in the next 5 to 10 years, we may be able to begin to, move up the
Great.
ladder. Otherwise, this $4 $3 billion economy means nothing. If Indians 150 million, 150 crore Indians eat twice a day, you will still log 5% GDP growth. Do nothing. So
Okay.
that I don't think is a very great indicator. What we need to do is to where we move on the technology scale, where China and United States are now running neck and neck. And China is going, and mind you, China is our main competitor in many ways. So we need to have a very clear thinking on that.
Correct. Thank you, sir. I think with this, we come to the end of the conversation. And as we conclude, one theme stands out clearly. The union budget is less about grand gesture and more about coherence between policy intent and execution, between fiscal choices and the institutional trust that we again and again refer to, and between growth, aspiration, and social outcomes. It is not just economic policy making. At the end, we want to live a better society. Thank you, our panelists, for the clarity and the candor, and to our audience who would be getting a very immersive experience when they get to hear your views for an engaging ideas. And we look forward to seeing how the forthcoming budget responds to the challenges and the opportunities that we discussed today. Before I wrap up, the budget ultimately is a mirror of states' priorities and its understanding of the moment it innovates. Whether it succeeds will be judged not just by markets tomorrow, but by the outcomes over time. So it's a long-term thing. So let's not give too much of expectations. Should not hover around this one budget, but over the time, how we, as a country, how we behave, respond, that matters the most. Thank you. Thank you so much, and appreciate really that you took your time and joined. It is a great experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Bye. Thank you. It's a pleasure.